Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. This is the second of a two-part interview with Pulitzer Prize-winning author William Kennedy, who's in Tulsa to receive the Peggy V. Helmerich Distinguished Author Award. Thank you for staying for a second segment, Mr. Kennedy.
Well, here we go again.
Here we go again. It's part of the cycle. This is the Writing Out Loud cycle. And we can't say it's a series, it's a cycle. Speaking of series, you wrote your first book, a novel in the Albany series, 1975. Is that correct? Legs?
Well, yeah, that was the first of Legs, right? That's the first.
And now you've got the new novel, Roscoe. Did you have an idea in mind of the direction once you decided that this was going to be a cycle, and you have the other wonderful there's six novels so far in the cycle, and then Roscoe makes the seventh. Did you start to develop a pattern or any kind of notion of what direction this cycle was going to go?
No, and I still haven't figured it out. But one book generates another. Out of Legs came Billy Phelan because of the kidnapping and the underworld that was involved and the political figures. And out of Billy came Ironweed, and out of Ironweed Ironweed and Billy together came The Flaming Corsage in embryo. The plot was developed in a very small way, and I couldn't write it right away, but it was in my imagination to go back to it over and over again. And then Quinn's book came as a desire to go back and write about the Phelans and the Quinns in 2 centuries. That was a failed effort in the sense that the second part of the century didn't happen, but I stayed with the 19th century. I loved it so much, and I loved the language that was going on with Quinn, and it was kind of a false language. It wasn't meant to be mockery. It wasn't meant to be authentic. It was just an imaginative throwback to an imaginary time, and my imagination, trying to relive the worlds as that I was living in now. You know, the worlds of journalism and literature, and living through wars and racial conflicts and theater and show business kind of family destructions and epidemics and so on. So many things came in my time that had an exact equivalent in the mid-19th century, and so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to balance them in the 2 centuries. It came to be just the 19th century, and then out of that came moving forward back into the Phelans and taking the whole range of the Phelan family that I had created in so many of the others. And then I finally got around to The Flaming Corsage, and I could at last write it. And having gone through the 19th century, and it is a turn of the century book. And finally, again, out of everything comes Roscoe, which is all about the political machine, which spans all of my life. The machine began in 1921, and it's still in power, and going on 84 uninterrupted years of democratic politics in City Hall in Albany. It's a phenomenon that's not likely matched anywhere in the country or the world. I don't know. No dictator has lived that long, kept power that long. But that's how the books have generated, and they spawn this interlocking pattern of characters developing at a certain stage. Somebody said nobody ever dies in your novels. Well, that's because I go back in time and see them again in an earlier incarnation. That happened with Frances. Well, Frances does die in one of the novels, but and is alive in so many other ways. There could be, I once thought of trying to do a continuity of time, taking segments of the novels and moving the thing from A to Z.
Sure.
But I've never done that. I don't know what it'll be like. It'd probably be all lost and scrambled, and the effect would be very strange. But
well, I think so, and again, that's what distinguishes the series from a cycle, and it is the cycling that is so interesting. You know, the Greeks had this notion of historical present, that everything in the past has an effect on the present in a way, and I get that sense as I read your work.
Exactly. I mean, the idea that the past is not dead, it isn't even past, is what Faulkner said. It's always present in everybody's lives, the influences of these great events or extraordinary people or great failures or great cataclysmic disasters, floods or whatever. They never really go out of, I mean, nobody who has lived through it is going to forget 9/11 in New York City.
Exactly.
It's a traumatic event that changed the country and changed individuals' lives and our whole psychic response to being American and the world's response to America. You know, so we're into something entirely new, and it's certainly not going to be past. And it's too new to even write about at this stage. You know, seriously.
Roscoe has a line that's one of my new all-time favorite line, that righteousness doesn't stand a chance against the imagination. Now, where did that line come from? Did you feel awfully good when you got that one nailed down?
I did like that line. As I said before when we were talking about this, there was another line that honesty is no substitute for experience. And this was a line that a sort of a hanger-on in Albany used to say in justification for backing the machine in all its corrupt endeavors, and refusing to give in to the do-gooders, the reformers, and so on, who never know how to do it. But the imagination was something else, and that's really what Roscoe is all about. I mean, Roscoe is one of the great liars, I hope, in my book, all my books, and he is able to invent new reality and speak about it with such authenticity and such intimate detail and such logic that people believe it, or they don't know whether to disbelieve it or not. And so it becomes, in a sense, an ambiguous reality and then a reality. It's like the big lie that we always heard during World War II for the first time, as I remember, and then the lies that, you know, this disinformation that our intelligence services and our enemies' intelligence services would put out about us and we'd put out about them. And it's what fueled the Cold War in so many ways. But this is what's happening with Roscoe, is that he is inventing not only himself, but other people as well, and ascribing behavior to certain people and their deeds. For instance, in Roscoe, in the book, it's his best friend, Elisha Fitzgibbon, a very wealthy man, commits suicide, and nobody can figure out why he did it. But Roscoe figures it out. And in the course of creating a scenario that may or may not have been behind the suicide, Roscoe creates new reality for everybody, and including a court case in which he has to go up against his ex-wife, who is going to sort of a blackmail scheme, and Roscoe has to invent, and he does over and over again. And the conclusion I came to is just the phrase you say, and he says it to the great love of his life, Veronica, who's the wife of a man who commits suicide. And he tells her honesty has no chance against the imagination, Righteousness stands no chance against the imagination, and that idea propels him into all sorts of mischief and fun, and it's true. And I think it's true. I think it's actually true in life that we...
I was hoping that you would read Roscoe in the Wind, this segment here, which again is just eloquence overcoming any kind of darkness, any kind of sadness.
Well, this is one of the sort of preludes to every chapter. There's one single page of kind of Roscoe in an abstract mode. It's called Roscoe in the Wind. That year, an ill wind blew over the city and threatened to destroy flower pots, family fortunes, reputations, true love, and several types of virtue. Roscoe, moving along the road, felt the wind at his back and heard the wind-blown voices. "Do you know where the ill wind comes from, Roscoe?" the voice asked him. "No," he said, "but I'm not sure the wind is really ill. Its illness may be overrated, maybe even fraudulent." "Do people think there's such a thing as a good ill wind?" they asked. "Of course," he answered, "and when it comes, it billows the sails of our city. It nourishes our babies, comforts our aliens, gives purpose to our dead, tranquilizes our useless, straightens our crooked, and vice versa. The ill wind is a none such and demands close attention." "Why should we believe what you say?" "As I am incapable of truth," Roscoe said, "so am I incapable of lying, which is, as all know, the secret of the truly successful politician." "Are you a politician, Roscoe?" "I refuse to answer on grounds that it might degrade or incriminate me."
That's a great passage. I noticed that this book is dedicated to Roscoe partisans. Explain the Roscoe partisans.
Well, these were people who read early segments of the book as it was in process and helped me with their enthusiasms or their reactions in some way or other. And, you know, people close to my heart, my son, my wife, several close friends, people I've known for years, some literary, some not literary, some just good, intelligent people. And
you've been married 44 years, almost 45. I mean,
right.
We're a month away from the 45th anniversary.
Right.
So writers can live happy lives and have normal families. And
well, so far, so good.
Yeah, and you have written with your son children's books. Tell us about Charlie.
Charlie Malarkey and the Belly Button Machine was our first. And then we wrote another one not that long ago called Charlie Malarkey and the Singing Moose. We're working on another cycle here.
I love it.
Where Charlie moves through these adventures. And that started with my son was about 4 years old, and I was telling him bedtime stories. We'd gone through Huck Finn or whatever, or whoever, J.D. Salinger, whoever I was reading him at the time, and he, his belly button was sticking out. So I said, once upon a time there was a kid named Charlie Malarkey, and he woke up and his belly button was gone. And he got intrigued by that, and then I had to keep going, and I'd tell it as far as I could. And the next night he'd say, "What happened to Charlie's belly button?" And so I'd start again and carry the story off as much as I could. And after 2 or 3 nights, I began to think that maybe I got a story here. And so I took notes on it. And as the weeks passed, I finally said, I'm going to write this. So I sat down to write it, and I was totally dead in the water. It was a lost day. I didn't do a thing on it. I couldn't move forward. So I thought, Brendan's presence is very important, so I brought him up and sat him in my rocking chair in my office, and I began to interrogate him. What happens next? What does Charlie say? What does the doctor say? What does his mother say? What does Iggy Gowalowitz say? And so on.
See, he's going to get a great autobiography out of this.
And so we got the book finished, and it just went along and went along, and we finished it. Nobody bought it for a long time, and then finally they bought it, and it was quite successful, you know. And it's,
I think that's terrific.
And then we wrote the other one, and and they're both around somewhere. I don't know exactly how many are in print now, but what's going on. But they got their own fan club too, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure so. And as we noted in our first interview, you're a journalist. You also, so you write a lot of nonfiction. And let's talk about Albany. And I love this subtitle: Improbable City of Political Wizards, Fearless Ethnics, Spectacular Aristocrats, Splendid Nobodies, and Underrated Scoundrels. Now, tell me how Albany works with the Albany cycle.
Well, it was helpful to the cycle. When I was in Puerto Rico, I was writing a book called The Angels and the Sparrows, and it was the first time I really took on Albany, and it was the establishment of the Phelan family. And that book never was published, but it had a lot of strengths, and a lot of people liked a lot of it. And it was a very dark and downer of a book, and so it went around and got enthusiastic rejection slips. That's as much as it ever got. But two agents represented it over a period of many years, and eventually I put it on the shelf, and went on to other things, but and let it circulate, and it never happened. But I did come back to it, and it became Very Old Bones, and out of that first novel, I realized that I wanted to know a lot more about Albany than I knew, because I really didn't understand my own neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I didn't know why it was the way it was, how it had been built. I didn't understand how it was dominantly really Irish and Catholic. And by understanding this neighborhood, I knew that I could, gain a lot more leverage for any future writing. So anyway, by the time a couple of years pass, and I go back to Albany to live for family reasons, and I go back to the old newspaper where I'd worked before, the Albany Times-Union, and the first serious assignment I got was to write a series of articles on the origin of Albany neighborhoods. It was a coup. I mean, it was exactly what I wanted to do, was to be able to research. And I spent 4 months on it, wrote a series of about 26 articles, and I always wanted to publish it. And it was a very popular thing in its time. And finally, I did. 20 years later, I was broke, penniless, really.
I've been there.
My income at the university was below the federal poverty level. But we were getting along. My wife was working successfully, teaching dance and running a boutique, and we made it. And then I said I would redo the book and upgrade it and so on. And I took about 8 months of typing as fast as I could, and included journalism I'd done on the city over the past 20 years since those first articles came, and it became Albany, and it's an enormously popular book with people who have any connection to the city. It's just, it's back in print again now.
Cycle, I think for anyone who reads the cycle, it's wonderful to read this book in conjunction with it.
Well, there's some very lengthy articles about the politicians and the origin of the political machine, and that's journalism in Albany. And from that, I've extrapolated and reimagined history to suit myself for Roscoe. But there's a fairly good grounding in there for Roscoe.
And then you've got this other wonderful, well, I'll call it a literary journal. It's nonfiction writing, The Yellow Trolley Car. And you talk about writers and people you have known. There's one interesting category, other exotic life forms beyond fiction. And Frank Sinatra's included. Why Frank Sinatra? When you're writing these wonderful essays about the Grapes of Wrath. Tell us about Frank Sinatra.
Well,
as an exotic form.
I remember Sinatra when I was a kid, when he first came along with Tommy Dorsey. I wanted to be a drummer, and I wanted to also own I played drums in military school, marching drums, and I wanted to own a phonograph, which I didn't have, and I knew I was going to get one. So I went out and I saw a movie. I can't remember the name. Ship Ahoy. I can't remember. It was Eleanor Powell, Tommy Dorsey, Buddy Rich, the drummer, and there was a drum solo called "Not So Quiet, Please," And Buddy Rich is practically the solo of the whole record. And I bought this before I had a phonograph. I couldn't play it. I just could imagine and remember the drum solo. It was fantastic. Buddy Rich was a genius. And when I met Sinatra in New York after one of his concerts, and in between Buddy Rich, who opened the show for him in Carnegie Hall, and then he was on after that, and I went back at the intermission, and one of his associates who had given me the tickets and said he'd introduced me to Frank. I'd been a fan ever since. This was like 1984 or 85, whenever it was. But in those intervening years, I became a fanatic. I mean, in the 50s, I just couldn't get enough Sinatra. The Swing Easy, but I talked to him, and of course he had been in that movie. I think I can't remember now whether I'm imagining that or not, but he remembered the movie very well. I think he was in it with Dorsey, and we had a very funny conversation, and a lot of funny things happened in the course of the concert, including my wife finally becoming a Sinatra fanatic as well as I was, and eventually I turned my son into a fanatic. But he was one of the great popular singers of the century, probably in the history of the country. I don't think there's anybody who's been more popular. Bing Crosby before him and Elvis after him, but he superseded Elvis, and he had so many comebacks, and he was just Sinatra is extraordinary, and people do find with his range and his timing and his phrasing. I mean, he's a just a spectacular entertainer.
My favorite song, "I've Got You Under My Skin."
Oh, it's great.
My cat likes Chicago, and that's odd because I don't think he's ever been to Chicago. But
well, that's Sinatra anyway. I got a lot of mileage on that piece. People who even didn't like Sinatra liked that piece.
Oh yeah, well the whole book, Writing the Yellow Trolley, is a wonderful, wonderful collection. I enjoyed it immensely. You mentioned movies. Iron Weed has become a movie. You were involved in the screenwriting of that, and also screenwriting of the Cotton Club. What is that like?
Oh, that was great. Francis Coppola this was 1983. I had just come down from Cornell and teaching, and I just was free and easy. I wasn't working in anything in particular, and I got a call from Francis is a producer, Fred Roos, to come down to New York and maybe write a screenplay with Fred, a movie he was planning to do, and he said, take you in and talk to Francis. He said he'd like to talk to you. So I went in and we talked for a couple hours, and he had read Legs and loved the dialogue, and he was in the process of writing a script on the Cotton Club, and he eventually, 2 days later after we met, I got the call from Fred, would I come to work and fill in the blanks of his script with dialogue for about 3 weeks, and I said I would, and I did, and I moved down to New York, and instead of 3 weeks, it became a year and a half, and I wrote with Francis, I'm sure, at least 40 drafts of that script. Wow. It was unbelievable the way we worked and the way he works. And I've written about that. That's in the Cotton Club Stomp. I was kept a secret on the project because they were selling the project as if it had been written by Mario Puzo, because the same team that gave you The Godfather and now trying to give you the Cotton Club. Well, it wasn't true. Mario had been gone from the project and before I came onto it. And anyway, it was a learning experience for me, and I had a great time with Francis, and we made, I think, a wonderful picture, and I think he's going to do with the Cotton Club one of these days the same thing he's just done with Apocalypse Now Redux, which is to expand it, and there's a lot more to be added. The talent that was cut from that movie, the songs, Lynette McKee singing Stormy Weather, and so much more, and Gregory Hines' numbers, and there's so many. That was such an abundance of talent in that film. It was, and it's a very odd film, it didn't get its due when it came out because everybody was reviewing the cost of it. But for me, it was a great learning experience, and at the same time, I optioned Legs and Billy Phelan and Ironweed, and everybody thought Billy and Ironweed and Legs were shoe-ins to get made, but Ironweed was the first one to get made. And
would you give it, what kind of review would you give in terms of stars? Would you give it a 5-star?
Out of a 5-star review, I would give it 6.
6. I like that. I love to hear an author who's happy with his projects. And not only are you writing all these things, but you're so good with words that this wonderful book has been written, Conversations with William Kennedy. And we'll end our interview, Mr. Kennedy. There's this great question asking you if you felt that you had a moral responsibility, and you said no, you felt that you had a moral fervor. Do you still hold that to be true?
You know, the whole pressure to be moral and to be righteous is kind of silly. You know, it's for a writer. It's transparent, and the idea of writing in the Cold War, writing a patriotic book against the Soviets, or if I were writing Legs, to be against gangsterism. And writing Roscoe to be against corrupt politics. Well, to me, the idea of illuminating the whatness of whatever it is you're writing about is the most important thing. And that's the morality of it all, is to illuminate what is, and your moral position on it will be of no consequence.
Well, congratulations on all your awards. We're proud to have you here, sir, and look forward to reading Roscoe. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Writing Out Loud is underwritten by
Koch Industries. Koch is a proud employer of nearly 1,000 Oklahomans. Koch Industries, you know us better than you think.